Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you very much, 𝓤𝓷𝓲𝓼𝓸 and 𝓤𝓾𝓷𝓭𝓪 for today's Sunday Pūjā chanting. Back with us this week, we have Brother Ghatikara Loo to share on the part 3 for the Samyutta Nikaya. Over to you, Brother Loo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brother Terence, for the very kind introduction. And a very good morning, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. I'm very happy that I'm able to, share, as well as, investigate the Dhamma with you on this wonderful Sunday morning. So, before we begin with today's Dhamma discussion and sharing, let us, first of all, put our palms together in Anjali, and pay our highest respect and homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One, whom through his great effort and sacrifice, he has rediscovered the path to liberation, and that has made it possible for us to practice the true Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, a very good morning again, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. So for our Dhamma discussion today, I will continue, where I left off, in the last two Dhamma discussions that I had with you. Um, and for this part three of the Dhamma discussion, I'm going to resume, with the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses of the Blessed One. And earlier, I actually extracted, in particular, I actually extracted these parts of this Samyutta Nikaya, which is actually from SN 30, 31, and 32. And also, I also briefly spoke about, Naga as well, and these four suttas essentially, are about, where the Buddha, the Blessed One, actually spoke, at quite great detail, in respect of, Nagas, which are what we call dragons, and Garudas, which are basically, like phoenixes, which are huge birds, celestial birds, And of course, in SN 31, the Buddha also spoke about Gandhabbas, which the Buddha mentions, that, these are actually celestial beings which actually stay in fragrant roots, fragrant trees which have fragrant flowers and fragrant fruits, at the roots, and of course, if you read the suttas, Gandhabas are also found, in Tavatimsa heaven, where, we have this Gandhabba called Panchasika, which is actually, um, uh, he's actually like an attendant of Sakadeva Raja, and he's a musician and he plays the harp, you know. So we see that Gandhabars are actually found in trees, but they're also found in Tavatimsa heaven based on these suttas that we have discussed before. And of course, we also discussed about the cloud devas, and where these devas actually reside in clouds, and how they actually wield the power, when they exercise their powers, their celestial powers, they're able to exert certain influence, on the weather that we have, whether it's a thunder, whether we're experiencing a thunderstorm, or is it a warm day, or is it a rainy day, or windy day, or sunny day, so a large part of it, does is actually influenced by these devas that reside in clouds, what we call the cloud devas, so which is actually in SN 32, so and of course, arising from these four parts of this suttas, from Samyutta Nikaya, I actually also, draw particular reference in terms of, the question asked by the Blessed One in terms of why beings actually are reborn in these four types of existence, right? You know, let me just show you the suttas just to maybe have a recap earlier, what we actually spoke about. Okay. Let me see. Okay. Okay, in particular, remember I actually mentioned about this sutta, from SN um about Nagas, which is from SN 29, and the monk actually asked the Buddha why someone is actually reborn, as Naga, and then the Buddha's response is that when someone does both kinds of deeds by body, speech, and mind, which means this person actually committed deeds, which are wholesome and unwholesome at the same time, which means that the karma that he committed, is actually ambivalent, and it's actually ambiguous. Sometimes you observe the sila, by avoiding the 10 unwholesome actions, and sometimes he doesn't, and he actually does these 10 unwholesome actions by body, speech, and mind, you see. So that is one answer given by the Blessed One in terms of why someone is reborn as Nagas. And if you look at this SN 30.3 again, it's really in relation to Garudas. And again, the monk also asked the Blessed One why someone is actually reborn as a phoenix, as a Garuda. And again, the Buddha actually gave a similar answer, and that is when someone does both kinds of deeds by body, speech, and mind, which is a mixture of kusala and akusala, in terms of the nature of the deeds which are committed. So it's a mixture of both. Sometimes he observes the sila, sometimes he doesn't. Okay. And if you actually then compare this and juxtapose this to, um, uh, let me see here. Okay, and again, from this SN 31.2, when someone actually asks the same question to the Blessed One, why someone is actually reborn as a Gandhabba, and the answer given by the Blessed One is that, when someone does good things by body, speech, and mind. So you see that the answer given here by the Blessed One is different, where the Buddha actually says that when someone does good things by body, speech, and mind, the Buddha did not say, good, and wholesome and unwholesome deeds, but the Buddha says that, because this person does wholesome deeds, by body, speech, mind, that's why this person, is reborn as a Gandhabba. So you can see the difference, in terms of, the cause and condition for someone to be reborn, as a Naga, as a phoenix, as compared to one that's actually born, as a Gandhabba. Uh, where we find that, this the Naga, and the Garuda, even though they're celestial beings, they uh, do possess, animal characteristics. So because of their ambivalent deeds, they are not able to be reborn as full-fledged devas, as compared to a Gandhabba, where he actually did, wholesome deeds, and it's not a mixture of wholesome and unwholesome. That's why he's able to, attain, the status as a full-fledged deva. So, and again, if you actually read also these Sutta, which I actually highlight to you earlier, you compare that against the cloud devas, the same question that was also asked by the Blessed One, why, someone is reborn, among the company of the devas of the thunder cloud host. And again, the Blessed One gave the same answer, it's when someone does good things by way of body, speech, and mind. So, so as you can see from here, when someone actually does just wholesome deeds, and instead of committing a mixture or of wholesome and unwholesome, so the Buddha says that because he does some good things by way of body, speech, and mind, that's why he's able to be reborn, as a whole, as a cloud Deva. So if you actually look at these four suttas, well, like I mentioned, from the replies provided given by the Blessed One, we can see that the main cause and condition, why someone is reborn as a semi-Deva, like Nagar and Garuda, and which actually have animal characteristics, as compared to one that's actually reborn as a full-fledged Deva, like a Gandhabba, as well as a cloud Deva. The primary, reason and cause and condition is because of um, the observes sila and the virtue and morality. If one actually commits primarily wholesome deeds, kusala karma, then this person is then able to attain a full-fledged deva in the next existence, as compared to one who does a mixture of wholesome and unwholesome deeds. Where sometimes one observe and avoids and try to refrain, from the 10 unwholesome actions, the 343 that I mentioned about by body, speech, and mind, and sometimes he doesn't, and he sometimes maybe he observe, maybe partially, maybe out of 10 he observes 6, and then the 4, he doesn't quite observe, and he hopes that by doing more dana, he's able to dilute, that akusala karma arising from not observing the 10 the 4 unwholesome actions, and because of that, he only observes partially in terms of observant sila. So because of that, the Buddha mentions that because of that, he is not able to attain of the status of a full-fledged deva in the next existence, and instead becomes a naga, or a garuda. So when you compare against these two, I would say uh, subsets of the suttas from Samyutta Nikaya, you can then actually glean a very interesting insight in terms of how important sila is, right? you know um, just by way of the extent to which you observe the sila will actually determine where your next destination is, right? Even though you do not descend into the higher realm, like an animal, or or maybe as a peta, afflicted spirit, or even in the niraya, in hell, and you maintain your status as a human, or even as a deva, there is still subtle difference in terms of your status, by virtue of the extent to which you observe the sila. If you're not careful enough and you are not assiduous or conscientious in terms of observing your sila, then then you, yeah, even if you do not descend into upper realms, and you have a favorable rebirth, and even then, there's no guarantee that you actually be able to attain of the status of a full-fledged deva. Instead, you are a deva, yet you have some animal characteristics, like you're a naga, a dragon, or a celestial bird, where you still have certain celestial power, celestial the psychic powers, but at the same time, you still possess animal characteristics, and you're not a full-fledged deva in that sense, because of the extent of which you practice your sila. And on top of that, I also went through with you in terms of the um in terms of the importance of uh um sila, as in terms of practicing the sila, as in our spiritual path, which actually determines our next rebirth destination. And I've actually selected quite a few suttas, but just a recap, like for example in AN 10.177, on this sutta with Janusoni, where I actually also spoke about the case where the Buddha's highlighted to Janusoni, that if someone does a lot of dana, is very charitable and very generous, but he does not observe his sila, and he actually commits the 10 unwholesome actions. And the Buddha says, despite, the abundance of dana that you have done, it does not dilute, the unwholesome karma that you have created, by committing the 10 unwholesome actions, and because most of the time, some people actually say, that, if I practice a lot of dana, it will actually dilute, the unwholesome deeds that have committed, by not observing the 10 unwholesome actions. And they actually gave the example, of a lump of salt, by adding a lot of water, into the cup, and onto the glass, and that would dilute the salt. So they gave that example, to fortify or to actually then strengthen their argument. That that's what the Buddha says, right? If you put a lump of salt, and you do and you pour in a lot of water, you will actually dilute the salt, and make it less salty, right? Or you put the lump of salt into Ganges River, you actually make it less salty. But if you read the context of the sutta, it is not in that context. Maybe that I will reserve that for another Dhamma discussion. But if you read from this AN 10.177, it is very clear, that the abundance of dana does not, in a way, mitigate, or it does not actually mitigate, or it actually does not dilute or weaken the bad karma arising from non-observance of the sila, by observing the 10 awesome actions. And because of this, this being, that does not observe a sila but does a lot of dana, he actually ends up, being reborn as a pet dog or a pet cat, or royal stallion, or royal elephant, in the because of the dana, the abundance of dana that he has committed, that he has actually performed, that he's able to enjoy the 5 courts of sensual pleasure, in terms of the luxury, the food, that's showered upon. But because of the lack of sila, he loses his human status, and he descends into the higher realms, and in this case, as animals. So this sutta itself is actually quite interesting in terms of it actually underscores the importance of sila. Just take note of this AN 10.177. You can read this sutta if you have the time, which is also very interesting in terms of the conversations that actually transpired between the Blessed One and Janusoni. And of course, the other one, of course, is MN41. In essence, what happens is that this village that the Blessed One, traveled to, and this village is called Sala, and the householders of this Sala, actually heard about the good reputation of the Blessed One, and they all went in crowds to see the Blessed One. So they all gathered, and they went to see the Blessed One, and they asked the Buddha, what is the reason and what is the condition? You see, part 4 here. Why some beings on the dissolution of the body upon death um, ends up in an unhappy destination, or even in a state of deprivation, and why is it that someone, upon death, is reborn in a happy destination in a Sugati Bhumi, either as a Manusa, as a human, or in the celestial realms, or as Brahmas, and what is the reason and what's the cause and condition for that, and of course the Buddha, gave a very detailed discourse, to the householders of this Sala, that the reason why um, beings, have different destinations upon death. The cause and condition is actually due to the whether this person, has conducted himself in accordance with the Dhamma or otherwise. If this person is of a righteous conduct and he observes, the and does and refrains, from the 10 unwholesome actions, like I mentioned, the 3, 4, 3, 3 by body, 4 by speech, 3 by mind, and he refrains this and does not commit, any of these 10 unwholesome actions, the 10 dukkha, in Pali. Then this person is then destined to a happy destination, But if this person is of unrighteous conduct and does not conduct himself, in accordance with the Dhamma, and he commits, these 10 unwholesome actions, the 𝓢𝓾𝓷𝓷𝓷, then this person then reappears in the states of deprivation, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. So again, this Sutta MN41 underscores the importance of observing our sila. And if you read the suttas, right, the Buddha does not confine to um, the observance of sila just to the 5 precepts. So time and time again, the Buddha actually spoke about this 10 ducharita, which is 10 by body, 4 by speech, and 3 by mind. So these 10 two charitas, of course, supplements our 5 precepts. In terms of the telling lies, of course, then instead of just telling lies, we also have the other 3, which is slandering, harsh speech, uh, and also in terms of speaking nonsensical speech, speech is not beneficial and not related to Dhamma, right? And of course, 3 by mind as well, in terms of covetousness, you actually harbor this desire, to you covered, after someone else's properties, and you actually scheme, to obtain these other properties belonging to others, and ill will, to the extent of you want this person to be killed, to be annihilated, to be that you want some misfortune to befall this person, that actually falls under this ill will. And of course, harboring wrong views as well, is actually part of the 3 by mind as well, the 3 unwholesome actions by mind as well. So you actually have this 3, 4, 3, which the Buddha spoke time and time again in suttas, that we must remind ourselves, not to commit, and to refrain, because the moment you commit these 10 unwholesome actions, then you create, the potential, for you to be reborn, in the upper realm, where you actually lose your human status, and you then end up, in these woeful planes, which there's much and intense suffering, in these upper realms, and it'll be very, very difficult. Like Buddha mentions, just like sand fingernails for you to then go up again, and elevate, to ascend again into the Sugati Bhumila as a human, or as a celestial being. Is going to be very, very difficult, and there's actually very, very few far and in between beings, which are able to, elevate themselves from these upper realms. So, see, these suttas actually underscore the importance of, practicing this, the sila, um, and in other suttas as well, other than the Buddha highlighting sila as the cause and condition for our next rebirth destination in our sojourn, in this samsara, right? The Buddha also speaks about sila, having this, in a way, the moral righteousness, like, in terms of, in terms of the virtue you have, the moral righteousness, and if you do not, and if you actually break any of these precepts, which means that you you commit, any of these actions, which breach the precepts, or you break the precepts, then this unwholesome action itself, whether by body, speech, and mind, will then carry, their resultant actions as well. Like what the Buddha mentions, like taking of life. It leads to a short lifespan, and stealing itself, loss of wealth, and then sexual misconduct, it leads to rivalry, revenge. Telling of lies, it results in being falsely accused, and then also divisive tale bearing. So it leads to breaking of one's friendships, and then harsh speech itself leads to unappealing sound. Frivolous chattering, leads to words which are not worth taking to heart, and drinking of fermented and distilled liquor leads to mental derangement. As you can see from here, the Buddha, highlights about this importance of this observance of this sila, in terms of the vipaka, that will result, from breaking, any of these precepts, and committing any of these unwholesome actions. So And of course, I also spoke about iti vuttaka, in terms of um, the Buddha actually spoke about, um, if a person actually, should actually have this wish, may praise come to me, or may wealth come to me at the break of the body after death, may I reappear in a good destination in the heaven. So again, you see, Sila itself, many a time I actually hear that people say that, oh, the purpose of us practicing Sila, is actually for us to meditate, as for us to form a firm foundation for us to meditate, so that we can actually have, the freedom from remorse, and being able to get into samadhi, right, in order for us to meditate, and see and to actually know and see, the true nature of things, right? So a lot of times people say that, oh, that's the purpose of us observing sila. That's actually for us to attain liberation and to attain nibbana and to be free from samsara. But if you actually look at the suttas, the Buddha actually taught sila, to various people, and including lay people as well, and the Buddha provided, a multifaceted um, um, uh, perspective, in terms of, how important sila is, like I mentioned, in terms of, our next destination, in terms of the vipaka that we actually reap, from the unwholesome actions that we perform, as we travel, in samsara, you know. And the Buddha also actually speaks about the mundane benefits, of observing sila as well. Like for example, if you want to, have people praising you, or if you actually want to, um, uh, have may your wealth, may wealth come to you. You actually grow in fortunes. And so the Buddha also speaks about the importance of observing sila if you want these wishes to 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 come to fruition. That you want to realize, these benefits. Then the Buddha also spoke about the importance of observing sila. And of course, I also spoke about uh, sila in the context of meditation, in terms of how observing morality, and virtue, provides, the support, and the building block for us to meditate, and for us to cultivate mental development, and for us to develop the knowledge, of knowing and seeing the true nature of existence, which is what the Buddha calls the Yata Bhuta Yana Dasana, and the Buddha says, in order for you to do this, the first starting point is actually for one to have uh, observe one sila, and to safeguard one's sila, well, and conscientiously, And if you can see from this A and 11.1, it's pretty easy to remember 11.1. If you can go to Anguttara Nikaya Book of 11, and if you look at this Kimata Sutta, the Buddha actually gave, wonderful explanation to Venerable Ananda in terms of, the purpose of practicing and observing sila. And the Buddha actually mentions, that um, 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 the Buddha actually replies to Venerable Ananda, right, in respect of the question he asked, what is the purpose of skillful virtues? And the Buddha says skillful virtues actually, leads to remorse, freedom from remorse as their purpose. Okay, that's what the Buddha says. Skillful virtues leads to freedom from remorse, and freedom from remorse itself, leads to joy, as its purpose, joy as its reward, which is actually pamoja. Freedom from remorse then leads to pamoja, because when freedom from remorse, then you have this joy that wells up within you, that, I've observed my sila well. I've been being I'm actually I've been very conscientious in observing my sila, and to the best of my knowledge, I have not, broken any precepts, before, and I've actually then safeguarded and refrained myself, from committing any of these 10 unwholesome actions. So you have this joy that wells up within you, and the Buddha actually calls it pamoja, joy, and joy, then leads to rapture, which is actually piti, and piti, then leads to serenity, which is what the Buddha called pasadi, because once you have this piti in you, where you feel that goosebumps in you, then that itself leads to serenity and tranquility, which is pasadi, and pasadi itself, leads to what? Leads to sukha, which is pleasure. Once you feel a sense of calmness, right? When you meditate, you come to the stage where you feel this calmness. When this with this calmness, right, you feel that that you have this pleasure, or this sukha, that wells up in you, and the Buddha says, this sukha itself, then leads to what? Then leads to samadhi, because you have this sukha itself, you feel very, very joy, pleasure, this sense of happiness, then you have this samadhi as a reward, and samadhi itself then leads to knowledge and vision of things as they truly are, which is actually Yata Bhuta Yana Dasana. And this Yata Bhuta Yana Dasana, seeing this things as they truly are, then leads to what? Leads to Nibbida, which is disenchantment. Okay, where you feel a bit like a bit weary, a bit tired, a bit like fed up, like of the existence, of all this sensual pleasure that you have, all this, then you becomes rather disenchanted, and this disenchantment on libido then leads to what? Dispassion, dispassion, which is viraga, and this dispassion, what does this leads to? Viraga then leads to what? Leads to the knowledge and vision of release as its purpose. Knowledge and vision of release, which is vimutti yana. So the knowledge, that that you have actually achieved, liberation, at certain stages, I know that I've actually attained Sotapatti or Sakadagami or Anagami or Arahantship, then that you have this knowledge and vision of release, the vimutti yana. So you see, the Buddha actually provided, um, incremental steps, in terms of the different stages you go through, and in terms of how one should, practice the Dhamma, in terms of practicing and cultivating yourself, step by step, until you are able to see, the breakthrough to the Dhamma, or you actually have the Dhamma eye arising in you, the Dhamma Chakku. So the Buddha says the very first step itself is actually for one to be skillful, in observing one's sila, or one's virtues or morality. So this sutta actually then, highlights and underscores the importance of the practice of sila, as the building block in our spiritual path. Because without that, it's actually impossible for us to actually proceed or to progress any further, in the practice of the Dhamma, right through, to be able to see Yata Bhuta Dasana, and also to have the Vimutayana. Because without the sila, without you safeguarding the sila well, then inevitably, you're going to have this remorse and welling up in you, when you sit down and you practice samatha, right, and you will try to calm yourself down. Maybe, you observe your breath, or you actually observe, the rising, falling of your abdomen. But once, your mind settles down, then all these um, pictures, or visions, of unwholesome deeds that you've performed in the past, they will actually start to well up in you and start to surface in your mind, and that will actually cause in a way, like remorse, and you keep, perhaps in a way, blaming yourself, that why you have actually done such unwholesome deeds, and it makes you very agitated and anguished, and you're not able to have um, uh, that peace of mind or tranquility for you to proceed further, because then you constantly are then assailed by remorse, and you're not able to proceed any further. So that's the importance of practicing sila in the realm of mental cultivation, in addition to the mundane benefits, like I mentioned, in terms of your next destination, in terms of your wealth, in terms of um, uh, in terms of your trying to avoiding all the unwholesome vipaka arising from breaking the precepts. So in the realm of meditation, sila is equally important. So you can see from AN 11.1 how the Buddha actually gave that gradation in terms of how you proceed, step by step, right from the start, which is skillful observance, of your sila, and even in AN 11.2 itself, the Buddha also emphasized and again highlighted and emphasized again the importance of observing sila and 11.2. Of course, in this context, the in terms of the sequence is the same in terms of how the skillful observance of virtue leads to freedom from remorse, and that leads to pamoja then leads to piti, piti then leads to pasali, pasali then leads to sukha then leads to samadhi, samadhi, then yatha bhuta yana dasana, then that itself leads to nibbida, and then the viraga, and then after that vimutti yana. So the sequence is the same, but it's just that in this case, the Buddha gave it in a different perspective in terms of the requirement for you to do an act of will, like for example, for certain they want to make that resolution, right? May I do this, may I be able to cultivate this, may I be able to practice, may I be able to achieve this, may I be able to practice dana, may I be able to, you make that act of will, that act of resolution that you want to do something. So the Buddha says, if you actually practice your sila well right from the beginning, there's no need for you to actually make that act of resolution, make of will that I will do this, may I achieve this, may I achieve that. It's just like a hen incubating the eggs, right? The hen doesn't actually have to make a resolution that, oh, may my eggs hatch, at the right time, or may they hatch into chicks. The hen doesn't have to do that. All it needs to do is she just needs to just sit on the eggs, and keep the eggs warm, all the time, and incubate, the eggs, up to a certain extent, where the chicks, are able to then emerge from the eggs, right? So the Buddha says similarly, there's actually no need for you to do an act of will. The moment you actually practice sila well, then uh, the Buddha says, then that itself, you would actually be able to progress, sequentially as what the Buddha mentions, step by step, once starting from sila and all the way to vimutti yana, so it goes um, incrementally as you progress. But it all starts, from skillful sila, as the building block. So again, if you see from AN 11.1, and AN 11.1 and AN 11.2, so these suttas again highlight the importance of observing sila, as the I would say the fundamental building block, in our spiritual path, because without that, there's actually very, very difficult for one to progress, in the spirit, in the practice of the Dhamma, because once you break any of these 10 dukkha, the first thing first, you have to create a potential, to to be degraded, into subhuman, into the upper realms, then in your sojourn of samsara, you're going to have this vipaka, all the akusala vipaka that you're going to experience arising from this 10 breaking of the precepts, and performing these 10 unwholesome actions, and even when you're um as a lay person, if you don't observe a sila, then you're going to be censured. You will not be praised. And the Buddha says, then not only that, you lose your wealth as well. Because you don't observe your sila, you also lose your wealth. And upon the breaking up of your body, upon death, then you're destined, to the Ducati Bhumi, which is actually, the realm of suffering and unhappiness, which is the upper realm. So, and not to even talk about, meditation, even at the mundane level itself, the sila, if you don't possess, skillful silas, and you don't observe your sila well, that itself, will become, quite, a significant obstacle, for one to progress further in the practice of the Dhamma, not even before even going to the realm, of mental development, to actually be able to see, and have breakthrough into the Dhamma, to gain, that knowing and seeing of the underlying true nature of existence of, or conditioned phenomena, not even going to the extent, Sila itself, you actually don't observe even a mundane level itself, you're going to actually reap a lot of unhappiness, and suffering as well. So, and of course, I also highlighted to you this sutta from Digha Nikaya number 2. Remember about this King Ajatasattu, who actually murdered his father, King Bimbisara, of the king of Magadha, because he wanted to ascend to the throne, and because of that, he was actually being abetted, right, by Devadatta, and because of that, he um, murdered his father, and he imprisoned him and he murdered his father, and he then and because of that, he managed to then ascend to the throne. And this DN2, actually records this conversations, between King Ajatasattu, and the Blessed One, and this King Ajatasattu actually wanted to meet the Buddha, on one night, which is actually the full moon night. And of course, this is a long sutta, I will not actually go deep into it, but essentially, in essence, King Ajatasattu actually asked, that what are the benefits, of being practicing, as what's the benefits of practicing the Dhamma, under the Blessed One, and of course, the Buddha, provided him, with a lot of this um, uh, benefits, in terms of, how practicing the Dhamma itself, leads to, a lot of uh, benefits and happiness as a recluse, as a samana, uh, and towards the end, and of course, towards the end, he was actually very inspired by the Buddha's discourse, and he actually then confessed and admit, that he shouldn't have killed his father. He said that a transgression has overcome me. I was so foolish. And so unskilled as to kill my father, a righteous man, a righteous king, for the sake of sovereign rulership. May the Blessed One accept this confession of my transgression, and I may restrain myself in the future. And of course, the Buddha, accepted, and then the king, delighted and rejoiced in the Buddha's words and left. You see, and the meat of this sutta, it says that not long after King Ajatasattu had left, the Buddha addressed the monks that this king is wounded, monks. This king is incapacitated. The Buddha says, had King Ajatasattu not killed his father, that righteous man, the dustless, stainless Dhamma eye would have arisen in him as he sat in this very seat. So you can see from here, that because he killed his father and he committed this patricide, so you see that because of that, now he felt very very anguished, and he was not able to have that composure of mind, the samadhi, to listen to the Buddha's discourse on this benefits, of a samana, practicing under the Blessed One. So because of that, the Buddha, because of that, his mind was rather muddled, and not truly in composure, not in samadhi. So after the king left, right, the Buddha says, had he not killed the father, this King Ajatasattu, would have actually become a Sotapanna, on that very night, right in that very seat itself, the Dhamma Chakku would have arisen in him, the Dhamma eye. But because he killed his father, and he, broke a very grievous precept, of killing. So because of that, now you see how that is actually then, in a way, compromised, on his ability, in terms of the mental cultivation, in terms of being able to realize the Dhamma, and he was not able to attain Sotapatti, on that very night itself, and the Buddha says, had he not committed, the killing of his father, then he would have actually attained Sotapatti, the Dhamma eye would have risen, on that very night itself. So you see how important this sila is, in terms of not just the mundane benefits, but also in terms of, uh, the in the realm, of mental cultivation, in the realm of developing, our mind, to see, the true nature of existence, in order for us to attain, nibbana, and also to unshackle ourselves from samsara. The very, very first building block or ingredient you must have is what? Sila, inevitably is sila. Now, of course, dana is something that you need to practice, constantly. Otherwise, if even if you have sila but you don't practice dana, like what I mentioned to you last time, there was a sutta, about this Princess Rumana. Remember, she asked that question. If two-person of equal sila, were to die, and be reborn, and in the heaven, what would happen, between one who did lots of dana and one who didn't perform any dana at all, and was was not generous, and the Buddha says yes, even though they may be reborn, as devas, in the celestial realms, the one who did dana, actually, far outshine the other one in terms of what? Ayu Vanu Sukang Bala, in terms of his beauty, the resplendent, the luminosity, the light that's emitted by the Deva, the Dana actually far, outshines the other one. And in terms of the authority, and rulership, of the kingdom in the Deva realm also, this one, the one who did more Dana actually, is a more powerful ruler, as the Deva. And of course, this Deva who did a lot of Dana also has a longer lifespan as well compared to the one who didn't do. And you see, so the benefits of dana also cannot be actually underestimated as well, can it be undermined? So you need to man balance, between sila and dana equally as well, and make sure that, you cultivate both. You do not want to end up in a situation you just do dana but you don't observe sila, then you end up as a pet cat or a pet dog, but you perform a lot of sila, but then, you lack in terms of dana, also not so good. Then, you are being you are being outshone, by other devas, like. So in a way, you are in a way more inferior compared to other devas. Like other devas shine brightly, they're stronger, they're more handsome or more prettier. They have a a big a larger kingdom, in terms of authority, in terms of rulership. They have a longer lifespan, maybe more aeons than you. So uh so we have to ensure that, we actually cultivate both um equally well, so that, we are not in a way shortchanged, lah, as to say, all right. But at the same time, we also must make sure that, we have this ultimate aim in our mind in terms of the ultimate purpose, what is to actually get ourselves out of samsara, right? To actually, extricate ourselves from this samsara that has uh is inconceivable in the beginning and inconceivable is the end, like what the Buddha says. You can never be able to fathom how long we have suffered in this samsara. So the Buddha says, it's time for us to wake up, and be really wearied, by really so fed up already with this samsara that, we shouldn't continue any further. So we must have this ultimate aim, while performing dana sila, we must also make sure that, we cultivate ourselves in terms of mental cultivation, in order for us, to realize, this yatha bhuta yana dasana leading to the vimutti yana, the knowledge and vision of release, of liberation. So so whether you're talking about mundane or whether you're talking about super mundane, supramundane, in terms of, practicing yourselves, mental cultivation, sila, is indispensable. Sila is critical. Sila is actually, a critical ingredient and building block, in the spiritual path, as what we can see from this suttas. You see, this King Ajatasattu is such a waste. If he had just been patient, and waited for the father, to actually relinquish the throne, which I'm sure King Bimbisara, would have willingly be happy to relinquish the throne to him, but he was just being not abetted, and being badly influenced by Devadatta, and because of that he killed his father, and you see he missed the chance of attaining Sotapatti, right in front, right at the very right in front of the Blessed One, right in front of right in front of Blessed One on that very night itself. If he had not killed his father and listened to the Dhamma, given by the Buddha, you see, and there, he would have actually attained the Dhamma Chakku, and he would have had only up to 7 lifetimes, for him to attain, final liberation. You see, that loss, the spiritual loss, is because of what? Because of non-observance of sila. So we can see that is actually something that's actually very, very critical to us, as Buddhists. We need to make sure we we are fully aware of that, and always keep it um and hold it, very firmly in our mind, in terms of how important sila is, you know. And of course, I just want to share this sutta also with you, that the Buddha says that even though you have committed an unwholesome action, or any of the 10 unwholesome actions, the Buddha says that you shouldn't actually dwell, all the time, into what you have done wrong, and you keep on churning and churning in your mind that, oh, I should have done this, oh, because I killed this, or because I committed any of these 10 unwholesome actions, or I actually spoke harshly, oh, I'm actually creating a potential for me to go down, into the animal realms, or to other existence of suffering, so if you kept on thinking and churning in your mind, and keep on being fixated on this idea, right? The Buddha says it will lead you to that, because the Buddha says that you keep on thinking about this, so it actually then it's as if you're being brought into that destination, You see, the Buddha says here, and if he doesn't abandon that doctrine, doesn't abandon the state of mind, doesn't relinquish that view, then it's as if he were to be carried off. He would thus be placed in hell, because you keep on harboring this remorse in your mind, So the Buddha says, in the practice of the noble one, the noble Dhamma, taught by the Blessed One, the Buddha says what you should do is you must make that resolution. You must actually firstly be aware and be clear in your mind that, okay, what I've done in respect of this action, whether by body, speech, and mind, is wrong, is unwholesome, is akusala, and I know, and I'm going to make that resolution today itself, that I will not repeat it in the future. I will strengthen my restraint. I will not, repeat this any further in the future. So the Buddha says that this is the way, for you to abandon the evil deed. That is the way of the noble ones, to make sure that you you do not actually, become too remorseful to it. So this is actually one important sutta. If you want to read about it, it's actually called the Sangha Sutta from this Samyutta Nikaya 42.8, which is actually something for you to share, because we also do not want you to feel remorse, that, oh, I've done this wrong. Definitely, I'm going to go down to hell, or what, or animal realm, see, because if you keep on harboring this, then it's also very dangerous at the last death moment, because your mind is then, in a way, being skewed to that channel of, or that frequency of energy, that you keep on harboring that remorse, then it's already dosa in your mind, and so the destination will not be favorable. So this sutta itself is important, but you should try to then reposition your mind, into the all the kusala actions that you have done, all the wholesome deeds, all the wholesome actions you have done in terms of dana, sila, bhavana, then to then reposition your mind, and to into a state, that's actually more wholesome, that will then prepare, that will then lead, to a happy rebirth, then in the next destination. So this sutta itself is important, SN 42.8. At the same time, uh, I think I also spoke briefly about this sutta from AN 10.174, because earlier I actually spoke about how sila itself supports meditation, which is bhavana, right? But if you read the suttas, if it also becomes quite interesting to note that the mental cultivation itself, it also supports, the observance of sila, So the both actually are in a way, they provide, the mutual support. If you observe the sila well, yes, it provides that sort of building block, the support, that base, for you to practice mental cultivation. But as you practice mental cultivation, and you have this mindfulness, sati sampajanya, and wisdom arises in you, and that itself, is actually able to support, your observance of the sila as well. You see, that's why, you see that for arahants, they do not, commit any of the unwholesome actions because of breaking of precepts, right? They are immaculate. They are actually for arahants, right? They do not actually commit any of the unwholesome deeds, because of non-observance of the precepts, or the 10 unwholesome actions, because that they have actually attained, that level of realization, that level of knowledge, the knowing and seeing, and the knowledge of liberation, and that itself has actually eradicated, greed, hatred, and delusion, the loba dosa moha, which is actually the source of deeds, the source of deeds, why we actually break the precepts. If we see from AN 10.174, with Janu Soni in terms of sources of deeds, just now was 10.177, right? If you actually move back a few suttas, 10.174, the Buddha actually tells the monks under this sutta, that the Buddha says that the committing any of any of the 10 unwholesome deeds, whether by body, speech, and mind, the cause and condition is what? Is because of the kilesas, because of greed, hatred, and delusion. So whether you kill, whether you steal, sexual misconduct, or the four unwholesome actions by speech, and the three unwholesome actions by mind, the Buddha says the committing of these 10 unwholesome actions, the cause and condition of this is because of what? Is because of kilesas, which is greed, hatred, and delusion. So if you're able to um, cultivate, and meditate to the extent you're able to, in a way, weaken, or attenuate or weaken the greed, hatred, and delusion, and or eventually to uproot this greed, hatred, and delusion, then the Buddha says that you're that you have removed the condition for you to commit, breaking any of these 10 unwholesome actions, from committing any of these 10 unwholesome actions. So as you can see here, so it's like, if you actually from your mental cultivation itself, that itself, is also supports your observance of sila, and observance of sila itself also supports your mental cultivation, which is your meditation. So both actually mutually support, and you can see from this AN 10.174, if the cause and because the cause and condition of breaking committing any of the 10 unwholesome actions is because of this greed, hatred, and delusion, we must then, practice, and cultivate, ourselves, and be able, to weaken, as well as and uproot this great hatred and delusion, in order for us, to be impeccable, in terms of, observing our sila, and in terms of not committing any of the 10 unwholesome actions. Again, in this AN Anguttara Nikaya Book of 3, the Buddha actually mentions, in order for us, for us to eradicate this greed, hatred, and delusion. Okay, so how is it that we should practice, in order for us to uproot this greed, hatred, and delusion? Okay, so because in the earlier sutta, we find that, greed, hatred, delusion is a cause and condition, right? Why we actually break the precepts and commit the 10 unwholesome actions. Then in this sutta, the Buddha actually teaches for us, how for us to understand how, we should actually practice in order for us to uproot this kilesas of loba, dosa, moha, And the Buddha mentions that there are these three ways that you should practice in order for us to uproot this lobha dosa moha. And the Buddha mentions about these three ways for us to gain insight into lobha dosa moha, and also for us to uproot and to abandon and to eradicate this lobha dosa moha. How is it that we should practice, should meditate in order for us to do that? So that we can um, have that mental ability, and the mental strength, in order for us to observe our sila, more conscientiously. So the Buddha says that there are three ways of practice. One is actually emptiness concentration, and the second one is signless concentration, and then undirected concentration. So if you are if you have this objective, or you actually have this um, resolution that you want to uproot this lobha dosa moha, the Buddha mentions that you must actually meditate, based on three ways. Okay, the Buddha says firstly is actually what we call the signless concentration and the undirected concentration. And these I would actually think that these two are the samatha way of practice. And the last one is actually emptiness concentration, which actually is vipassana. So that's what the Buddha says. For us to attain liberation, we actually need samatha and vipassana. And in this sutta itself, the Buddha actually explains these three ways of practice in order for us to, eradicate this lobha dosa moha. Firstly is actually signless concentration and undirected concentration, and these are essentially under samatha practice. And the third one is actually what we call the sunyata, which is emptiness concentration, which is under vipassana. So this sutta itself, the Buddha speaks about three ways that we should actually practice meditation in order for us to uproot and eradicate lobha dosa moha, in order for us to be more conscientious, and have the better ability, to observe our sila to an extent, where it becomes impeccable. So we all want to do that, but a lot of times, our ability to observe the sila also depends on, how well, we meditate, how well spiritually cultivated we are, because sometimes you may have the the will, to observe it, but sometimes, you just feel that, the temptation is just too strong, and and you just feel, the motivation is too strong for you to, and you just break the precept anyway, even though you're wrong. So that mental cultivation is actually very important, as what we can see from this sutta itself. And in order for us to strengthen, our mental development, the Buddha says we must have these three, and we must actually practice based on these three types of meditation: the signless concentration, undirected concentration, and also the sunyata, which is emptiness concentration. Okay, and in for us to understand this signless concentration, what exactly is this signless concentration? Can refer to Samyutta Nikaya 40.9, and this sutta actually describes, the at the time when this Venerable Moggallana, was actually practicing, you know, meditation, and he was practicing, um, all through the jhanas, right through the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. He was actually trying to attain arahantship, by practicing very, very hard, to attain um, the final realization. Um, and and here are, Venerable Moggallana actually experienced, various ways or various impediments or obstacles, that somehow seem to distract him, in his meditation. Um, so you can see from this sutta, right? This sutta actually starts off, by this um, this what Venerable Moggallana actually mentioned in this sutta. He says, this silence concentration of the heart, the silence concentration of the heart. Now, what is that? What is this silence concentration? See, then we can actually get a glimpse of this silence concentration by actually looking at this. It's actually, Venerable Moggallana says, it's actually in a meditation, where one does not pay attention to any distinguishing signs, and enters on and dwells in that concentration of the heart, which is without signs. This is called the silence concentration of the heart. Then he mentions that um, the signs and features of this sense object. He entered and dwelt in that concentration of the heart, which is without signs. So we can see. Then which is without signs. But then he said, as I dwelt thus, the consciousness conforming to signs arose, which means, even though he tried to practice this silence concentration, his mind, kept on being drawn to the signs, that um, that uh, that impinge on him, the signs of the sense objects, because it keeps on thinking about certain sense object, the signs, maybe the enticing signs of certain sensually enticing objects, or maybe it can be about anything that actually that relate to loba dosa mohala, these sense objects. So his mind keeps on being drawn to these sense objects, So even though he tries to practice this silence concentration by not focusing on the signs and features, of the sense object, but he keeps on being drawn to it, So uh, then then what happens is, the Buddha then appears before him, and told Venerable Moggallana, and he says, Moggallana, do not slacken off, in a silence concentration. Make your mind steady, make the mind one pointer, concentrate your mind in a silence concentration. Then, then after that, Venerable Moggallana, he listened to the Buddha, and he paid no attention to the signs and features of the sense object, and he entered on and dwelt, in the silence concentration of the heart. So from this sutta, we can actually get a glimpse in terms of what this silence concentration is. So what it means is, for example, if you feel angry that someone actually speaks, harshly to you, or you hear something that's not something unpleasant spoken about you. So this silence concentration means that you do not dwell, on the signs and features, of that sense object that has caused the anger to arise in you, because the more you focus on it, right, then the more um, agitated you are, and the anger itself will elevate and increase in intensity, right? So the first thing to do, is actually, to draw your attention away, and do not focus on the signs and features of the sense object that has caused the loba dosa moha to rise in you. So that's why it's actually called signless. You do not pay attention, to any distinguishing signs of the sense object. You don't look at the signs and features of the object. So that is actually what is actually meant by this silence concentration, and that is actually how you practice samatha in order for you to have that serenity of mind. So in other suttas as well, in this Sutta Nipata 2.11, the Buddha also advised Rahula to practice this signless concentration. You can see from here, meditate on the signless and get rid of a tendency to conceit, to self, because I mean, it's very often than not, when you pay attention to the sign that causes the kilesas to arise in you, right? Whether it's greed, whether it's hatred or delusion, right? More often than not, if you keep on focusing or being fixated on that sense object, then you find that you actually have this tendency of I, right? That I'm if oh, I feel very angry, that why did he, or she actually speak such things about me? Then it's like the 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 sense of self is really there, right? The conceit is there. You have this sense of I and you and I and him. There is this sense of I is there. So the Buddha says that you must first of all must actually cultivate this signless concentration. Remove and extricate yourself, from that sense object that causes the kilesas to arise in the mind, and focus, and observe internally, and that's actually what we call undirected, concentration, which I will explain this about uh, this signless concentration and also this undirected concentration. To understand about this undirected concentration, you can actually go to this Samyutta Nikaya 47.10, which the actual Buddha also spoke about what is this signless, what is this undirected concentration? You see, here, the Buddha actually explains to Venerable Ananda, what is this non-directed concentration. So, if you read the suttas, the Buddha actually explains, um, when a monk is actually meditating, and suddenly, there is this worldly desire and dejection, arise in him, it's, I mean, more often than not, right, we actually have these five hindrances, where you actually have this greed and hatred, right? Sometimes you have this sensual desire, only sensual desire that arises in you, or you actually may have a sense of dejection or dosa or unhappiness or anger that arises in you. The Buddha says when that happens, you know, um, you see, as he dwells contemplating the body, some bodily object arises, or physical discomfort or mental drowsiness causes his mind to wander to external things. Means, that these five hindrances arise and he keeps on, he's drawn by these mental hindrances, five hindrances that arise in his mind. He maybe keeps on dwelling, on the sensually enticing object that arises in him, or he feels anger, or he feel drowsy, or he feels that that he's not able to continue meditating because all these hindrances are becoming very powerful, because and then the mind starts to wander to these external sense objects that arise in him. So the Buddha says that then Ananda, that bhikkhu's attention should be directed to some inspiring object of thought, that he should actually direct it to some object that actually that will inspire him, where delight springs up in him. Once the delight happens, then rapture arises. Like what I mentioned earlier about the pamoja, piti, then the piti itself, then causes, leads to the pasadi, then pasadi leads to sukha, and sukha then leads to samadhi, then the mind becomes concentrated, right? The same sequence that the Buddha actually explained. So then he reflects thus, the aim on which I set my mind has been achieved. Let me now withdraw my mind from the inspiring object. So once he has actually been inspired, and his mind is able to be composed again, then he draws his mind away from these external objects, and um, and he's now, he's actually then be free from all these mental hindrances. So the Buddha says, that Ananda, right, such is the practice of the direction of mind. That means that you direct your mind to some inspired objects in order for you to overcome these five hindrances. And the Buddha then asks us, oh, what Ananda is the practice of this non-direction of mind? Then the Buddha says, a monk who does not direct his mind to external things is aware. My mind is not directed to external things. Then he is aware my mind is not concentrated on or before or after is set free and undirected. And I dwell in contemplation of the body ardent, clearly aware and mindful and joyful. So basically, what this undirected concentration is that instead of you being drawn to external object, that causes lobha, dosa, moha to rise in you. Firstly, you have the silence concentration, right? Means you remove yourself from the object, that actually that provokes lobha, dosa, moha to arise, and don't concentrate on the signs and features and do something else. It can be like breathing, counting down 1 to 10, or doing some other things, don't think about that object that causes you the anger, and then you also do not direct your mind to the external object, which means you then look inwards into your mind, which is a subject and not the object. Look at your mind, how does it react to the external object, is there lobha, dosa, moha, that has arisen in my mind? So that's what the Buddha means by undirected concentration, because it's not directed to external object, but it goes inward, internally, which is uh, that means you actually contemplate inwards, you know. In fact, the one of the characteristics of a Dharma is what opanyayiku, right? People actually mention, some people translate it as leading onwards, but actually it means leading inwards. No, means you must actually look inwards. In the practice of the Dhamma, right, you must always have this introspection in you. Like what the Buddha says, always be aware, always watch your mind. What has surfaced in your mind? Is there loba dosa moha? Like part of the chitta nupassana practice of the four foundations of mindfulness, right? You must always have this chitta nupassana. Is there loba dosa moha? And the only way you can actually do this is by what? Is by non-directed concentration, right? Where you're not directed, you don't direct your mind to external object, but look inwards. And on top of that, you actually then practice silence concentration. You don't look at the signs. You draw yourself away from that. So, and you look inwards. So that is actually part of samatha for you to gain some composure, some serenity, some tranquility before you then embark on this meditation on emptiness, which is vipassana, which is meditation on this sunyata, which is emptiness. So before you even do that, you need to have this precursor, right? These steps in order for you to not to be uh, not to be drawn. Otherwise, like what the Buddha says, then like what the Buddha says in this sorry, in this SN 35.19 about the tortoise. Remember, I actually spoke about this earlier, that if you do not practice this silence and undirected concentration, then it's just like this tortoise that has extended the four limbs and the head out of the tortoise shell. Then once he does that, then the jackal will then seize this tortoise, and eat the flesh alive, right? Because you have actually, the tortoise has extended the limbs, and the head out of the shell. So what the Buddha says that you must actually look inwards, and practice silence concentration so that you remain restrained, and you safeguard your sense base, and you do not then retort, by scolding back, in angry words, that will result in unwholesome karma, right? But you must actually then make sure you go inwards, and have composure first, look inwards, and have introspection, so that you don't extend yourself. Because the moment you extend yourself, you get eaten up by the jackal, very much like Mara has actually then also ensnared you, because you have actually reacted, um, you know, in unwholesome ways, to these sense objects. Then you're already in a way out of your domain already, and the Buddha, just like what Ajahn Chah says, then the chickens are out of the chicken coop, and then so you already let the chickens out of the chicken coop. You have not actually kept the chickens properly in the cage, but it's actually out of the coop, and because of that, you tend to react in unwholesome ways. So the Buddha says, silence concentration and undirected concentration, you restrain yourself, safeguard yourself, don't actually react, and be restrained, and the Buddha says, you must guard your faculty of your sense base, you know, um, and when you dwell with the doors of your senses well guarded, right, Mara, will not have opportunity, and then will lose interest and leave. So the most important thing is, when you know that you have anger or greed or delusion arise in your mind, remember, signless and undirected concentration must be practiced first, so that you don't become like the tortoise that extends the limbs out from the shell, and get eaten up by the jackal. So that is what is important for us to take note. Um, and of course, in order for us to know, whether whether loba dosa moha arises in your mind, right? In order for you to be able to practice this silence, as well as this undirected concentration. First of all, you must actually know that loba dosa moha has arisen in your mind, right? Because if you yourself are not aware and you get carried away, then there's that you cannot, practice this silence and undirected concentration. So you must actually watch and and guard your mind at all times, right? That's why the Buddha in AN 3.105 says this Kutta Sutta, this peak of roof, the peak of the roof. The Buddha says, that the guarding of the mind and protecting the mind is very important, because if the mind is unprotected, the actions by body, speech, and mind will actually be unprotected, and it becomes soggy. It becomes and becomes if it's soggy, then they rot. And when these actions rot, then one's death is not auspicious, and one would not have a good death, so so watching the mind is actually very important. That's why it's very important for us to anchor ourselves in the always in our sixth sense basis. Must always remember what actually surfaces in our mind. Always watch your mind. Is my mind wholesome, unwholesome? Is there loba, dosa, moha? Then Buddha says if there's loba, dosa, moha, make sure first of all Buddha says you have to quickly remove this loba, dosa, moha, just like when a lady looks at her face in a bowl of water, right, calm water, and she sees that there's actually some dirt on the face, or some morsels of food on the mouth, then she will quickly want to remove all this dirt, and all this blemish on the face, right, and quickly remove it using water, and also so that's what Buddha mentions, in terms of how important it is to actually safeguard your to watch your mind, and guard your mind at all times, whether there's loba, dosa, moha. That's why in SN 35.1453, the Buddha mentions if you're able to watch your mind and able to guard your mind at all times, and knowing whether loba, dosa, moha arises in you, and whether no loba, dosa, moha arise in you. The Buddha says by just by doing this, the Buddha says you're able to attain arahantship in this very lifetime. That is how important this watching the mind is. Watching the mind, whether any kilesas, and if you know there is, then you have to quickly put this out. Just like the Buddha says, the person looking at the bowl of calm water and seeing that there's blemish on the face, and the Buddha says, just like a person's turban is on fire, you must try to quickly remove these kilesas, using all your effort, and try to uproot and eradicate and loba, dosa, moha. So and the Buddha has given very, very clear instructions, in terms of how you should practice loba, dosa, how you should remove this loba, dosa, moha, by practicing firstly, this watching the mind, and then after that, you must actually practice silence and undirected concentration as part of the samatha practice. And of course, then ultimately, we must also make sure, that we must apply wisdom in order to and we must use these kilesas as the fertilizer, for the tree of wisdom to grow. We, instead of fighting this kilesas, we must use these kilesas, as the fertilizer, as the in a way, as a support, for us to realize the true nature of existence, and the Buddha mentions that the way to do this is actually when we then cultivate this meditation, on emptiness, which is sunyata, and there will be a few other discourses, where the Buddha spoke about this meditation on emptiness, which is the practice of vipassana, which is looking at the contemplation of non-self. Because if you actually realize non-self, essentially, essentially, all things are actually empty, and non-self, That's why the Buddha says sabit dhamma anatta, everything is actually non-self, So and in order for you to do that, you must practice this meditation on emptiness. So I will then continue with this meditation on emptiness, in the next Dhamma discussion, where I will then go into the various discourses where the Buddha actually teaches us in terms of how we should practice this meditation on emptiness, in order for us to supplement the silence and the undirected concentration, which is part of samatha, for us to gain that composure of mind, to have that samadhi, the commotion of mind, for us, before we are able to then um, uh, meditate, on this emptiness, on existence, on all condition phenomena, and these other suttas I will be sharing next week, in terms of how we should actually practice in order for us to realize the emptiness and the non-self, of all things, of all dhammas. So I will basically leave you with this verse, where today I've actually discussed with you in terms of the importance of sila, from the mundane perspective, but importantly also, for the role played by sila, in the realm of meditation, where we can see that meditation provides that building block in terms of being providing us with freedom from remorse, all the way to Yata Bhuta Yana Dasana and Vimuta Yana. And conversely, meditation also provide us with that knowledge and wisdom, that will actually strengthen our mind, and also to uproot the Loba Dosa Maha, which is actually the cause and condition why, we break the precepts and also commit, the 10 unwholesome actions by body, speech, and mind. So, today I've also covered in terms of the concentration, silence concentration, and also in terms of undirected concentration, which is samatha practice. And next week, I will then um, dive, into this meditation on emptiness, in terms of how we should actually practice in order for us to realize the non-self and the emptiness, of all Dhamma, of all things. So I will continue next week, and next week, on the meditation and emptiness. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Loo, for today's Dhamma sharing. Now let's dedicate some merits to all beings, whether they're seen or unseen. Akasatha ca Bhummatha Deva Naga Mahidika Punyang Tamanumoditva Siram Rakkantu Lokasasnang Etta ca Amhehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Dewa Sabbe Bhuta Sabbe Satta Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Imina punya kammena mame bala samagamo. Satang samagamo hotu yawa nibbana pattiya. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you everyone for watching. For other videos, please visit the links below. Bye bye for now. See you all again soon.